Drucker. I'm the host of In Trump's Shadow, a Ricochet podcast and a companion to my book that is now out, In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. The star of the show tonight is Chris Stirewalt. He's a good friend of mine. He's witty. He's funny. He's the only guy that I really get jealous of in Washington. And he's got a long resume. As Brian alluded to, contributing editor at the Dispatch, senior fellow at AEI, American Enterprise Institute. He is the author of the book, Every Man and a King, and you should check out his podcast with Eliana Johnson, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, Ink-Stained Wretches, where they talk about the state, such that it is, of the American news media almost every single week. It's just really a great listen. So I'm really excited to have Chris here so we could talk politics and kind of do what we normally do. And Chris, in honor of that, I mean, I was serious. We'll just do what we normally do. So I poured myself some Jefferson's Reserve.
There you go.
And I'm good to go. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm not disclosing what's in my thermal mug, but I am toasting you.
It's like when I interviewed John Boehner, he had a coffee cup, but I'm convinced there were copious amounts of red wine in that coffee cup.
I was at an event one time and somebody asked John Boehner, is this on the record? I guess this is members only, like the jacket, right?
Correct. This is a Ricochet members only event. So
I'll be a
few of us friends.
I'll be a little okay. I'll put it in somebody else's mouth. I heard that one time at an event where John Boehner was speaking, they asked him if he wanted something to drink. And they meant coffee or a bottle of water. And he said, I would love to have a Bloody Mary. And they found one for him and brought it to him. And he drank it during the event. And this person thought that was pretty damn cool.
Yeah. I like to do all of my events with something colored brown. Well, listen, let's get underway here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the latest episode of No Dumb Question, which means the only dumb questions you're going to get are from me. But everybody else, really good questions. Look, Chris, you and I have spent, maybe a decade just shooting the shit about politics and how the media runs and this wacky business that we're in. And, nobody really paid us much attention, I would think, other than where we worked, and they seem to like us there. But over the, in the past year, people have been bugging you more often than not. And the way I like to back into this question is, after Fox News correctly called Arizona and you were on the decision desk, even I emailed you and I was like, hey, Chris, are you sure? And you're like, dude, get lost. Like, well, you made the call and it's the right call.
Well, you wouldn't have called it if you weren't sure. The consequences for being wrong on a call are far greater than the rewards for being first, right? Being first is great. But nobody, I was on the Fox News decision desk for 10 years. I worked for Bill Salmon, the managing editor. You will note that neither of us are at Fox anymore. But Fox used to call us the best in class decision desk because we were. We never pulled a call back, never retracted a call, and beat the competition like a drum, cycle after cycle after cycle. But I can tell you that nobody remembers who got it first. But if you get it wrong, they will remember forever. Arnon Mishkin, who we call QAnon now, the great QAnon, had to testify in front of Congress after the 2000 election, where the early call in Florida, which came while there were still votes out in the Panhandle, because people forget Florida has a handful of central time zone counties, that the call that came in before the voting had stopped, and he testified in front of Congress and made a promise that never again would Fox call any race while the polls were still open, while people were still voting in that state. The consequences of being wrong are really serious. So there's just no percentage in calling it wrong. So after we called Arizona, and there were people like you who said, are you sure? And it's like, well, yeah, of course we're sure, because if we're wrong, we'll be set on fire and thrown from the top of a building. And then there were people who didn't care whether we were right or wrong, but our call interfered with the narrative. And we have to remember the backdrop for all this stuff is that Trump had already said how he planned to steal the election, right? He had already said, we'll be up big. There'll be the red wave, the red mirage will be in because of the way that Pennsylvania and some other states counted their votes. And it would look big, and that they would come out and they would say Trump would declare victory while he was still ahead in the count. And then when the remainder of the votes were counted over the coming days, they would say that Joe Biden stole it. So we knew that we had to be right, and we had to not deviate from our normal standards, right? I can't tell you that I think that other networks deviate. I cannot tell you with absolute surety that other networks deviated from their standards. But when I read reporting subsequent to the election that folks were waiting for us to go first, I did not dispute that reporting. And we knew we had to be just like we always were, first and right. And the people who were like you, curious, is that, are you sure? That's fine. I was, you're hurt. No, I wasn't hurt. That's genuine curiosity. But there were people who didn't care whether it was right or it was wrong. They just didn't want the call to be made because it undercut the narrative that Trump was pushing.
So what I think is really interesting about all of this is not that, because it's been, litigated now so many times that I feel like we've rerun the 2020 election, 5 million times, and it's still going. But, once upon a time when you and I were wee lads, if the media made a call, if a media organization made a call, and if the media, whether it was the evening news or my local paper or the bigger national paper, reported news, we all kind of just trusted that it was generally true and generally came from a good place.
But you didn't grow up in my house then.
I grew up in a house where we mostly read the sports page first, and I grew up in Southern California. So we had the Los Angeles Times and the LA Herald Examiner, and we watched 60 Minutes every week. Yeah. And look, it's not that we would just believe things because people tell us, but there wasn't a deep debate about the efficacy of the news as it was reported.
Well, my father was a Goldwater Republican, and my father was a Goldwater Republican, and my mother was a Phyllis Schlafly conservative. My father was a coal executive, and I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, and St. Louis, Missouri. And I can tell you that my father and my parents knew that the liberal media was a bunch of damn liars, and they didn't trust many people in Washington were amazed at the response to Sarah Palin in 2008. And the way that Republican, even though she was so obviously a nincompoop, so many Republicans ran to her defense and were excited about her. And people were baffled by this, but they didn't understand. Whatever the New York Times hates, a decent percentage of the Republican electorate will rally to. There, so much of Republican and so much of the right, so much of Republican politics and so much of the right in America is negatively defined. That is to say, whatever you people are for, or whatever you people are against, we're for, and whatever you're against, and you know what I mean.
Totally get it. And you're right about that. And I think that's why talk radio became such a behemoth and such an industry, because it was a place to go to hear news that you wouldn't hear elsewhere, where to hear points of view about the news you wouldn't hear elsewhere. But what I remember, even in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, when I was a Cub reporter, is that Republican politicians would argue to me that the news was biased and spun. And now what I hear, and I hear this from voters when I interview them for stories, which is how I know what they're thinking, is that the news is made up and it's fake. And this is something you explore with Eliana Johnson and Inkstay and Wretches every week. First of all, how do you think we got to a point where people just simply won't believe the news? And is there anything that can actually be done? I mean, yes, we could do a better job. And I could name you 20 things in which we could do a better job. But I feel like the brand of being a journalist and a reporter has been so damaged, in many ways by us, that I find it difficult to know exactly how to resuscitate the idea that you can trust the news. And because, by the way, I get it from the left, but just for different reasons.
Yeah,
They don't trust, and it's not because I work for the Examiner, although that's why they don't trust me, but half the time. But even the ones that trust me, they don't trust the news, but for entirely different reasons than conservatives.
Well, you have it hit nicely. Half of them don't trust you because you write for Vanity Fair, and then the other half doesn't trust you because you write for the Examiner. So you've got all your bases covered. You have alienated 100% of the potential marketplace.
I've still got my wife.
That's right, exactly. Depending on the evening. Look, why is it that Americans know so much more about their health and healthy eating, but we are so fat and unhealthy? The majority of American adults are now obese. Why, if we know so much more and there's a gym on every corner, why are people so fat now compared to the 1960s? And people have all of their theories. I'm sure there are gluten people and there are non-gluten people. There's all of that stuff. But what's the simple answer? Variety, choice, everywhere you go, right? McDonald's was when San Bernardino when there was one McDonald's and it was in San Bernardino, California. And the idea of unlimited cheap calories there were still a lot of them when McDonald's opened, there were still a lot of Americans struggling to get enough calories in the day. People in places like West Virginia and Kentucky, Alabama and Mississippi, getting enough to eat was still a concern for a number of Americans. We went to such abundance that we developed the diseases of affluence. In America, on an informational basis, we have the diseases of affluence. We have so much choice, so many varieties that you can create a junk food diet just for yourself. And when somebody takes away the gummy bears, you're offended. You're upset. How dare you, sir? And if you think about it this way, and this is what I like about Ricochet, this is why I'm at the Dispatch. This is why the work AEI does is important. If you let yourself, you can climate control. I'm sorry to mix my metaphors here, but you can climate control your life so that you never hear any point of view that disagrees with yours. You will be told that you are right and they are wrong. You'll be told that you are heroic and they are evil. You are patriotic and they hate America. And whether you're a Bernie Stan or a mega MAGA or however you ice your particular political cupcake, you can find a subset of news, not just right left. That was the revolution with Fox. Revolution with Fox was, what if we appealed to the other half of the country, right? You guys have been appealing to this half of the country. What if we appealed to the other half of the country? And the results were incredibly lucrative, right? The success was enormous and has been for 25 years. But now it is to the point where, well, I'm conservative, but I'm kind of like a Catholic integralist, but a Josh Hawleyite. I want to like down the, I'm a 7 on the Soeb Amari scale. This is where I'm going to go. You could have that. Or you could say like, but I'm really more of a David Frenchian kind of, and you could tailor your feed, the news content that you consume, to do that. The problem is when we have to come into common spaces and do things like conduct elections and say, okay, we counted them. Here you go. You think about if we had to do the 2000 election over again now. I watched these Flibberty gibbets out in Arizona trucking stuff out to the fairgrounds to have the cyber ninjas look for bamboo fibers in their underpants. And it was, I thought, imagine if we had to do the 2000 election over now. The Democrats' argument in 2000 was not crazy. The butterfly ballot in Palm Beach County, I doubt that Pat Buchanan got the kind of support in Palm Beach Gardens that he did on purpose. I am sure that voter intent was that the voter intent was not met, and that those Pat Buchanan votes were really Al Gore votes. A decent argument. And what? Bush won by 530 some odd votes. So the Democrats' argument in 2000 was not without any merit, right? But the Bush argument was, we had an election. The election was decided. if we keep recounting and counting and counting until you overturn the result, because that's what you'll do. You'll keep handling these ballots, and you'll knock these chads out, and these ballots will be disqualified. And then eventually you'll just keep recounting these ballots until you get the outcome that you want in these targeted counties. And the Supreme Court said, yep, you're going to basically undermine the legitimacy of the whole election, of the whole thing. So we stop here. A win's a win. This is rooted, by the way, and this isn't really an answer to a media question, but I think it merits pointing out. Every time the politicians tell us this is the most important election ever, it's the most important election. Now, if you were going to say the most important election ever, you'd say either 1800 or 1864. 1800, that the party in power could be defeated and would peacefully hand power over. That was pretty big. 1864, we're in the middle of a civil war. We're still going to have an election, and the president's going to honor the result. But the lie that this is the most important election is an insult to a Madisonian system that says what? There'll always be another election. This isn't the most important election, because the most important election is what? The next election. The next election. And I think we've sort of lost our footing on that.
Yeah, I like to tell everybody there's an election every 2 years, and then there's a few in between, like the Virginia one that just happened.
Right.
So
if you don't like this one, yeah,
all is never lost. It's just delayed.
What is the James Carville line? You're never as far down as you think you are, but that means that you're never as far up as you think you are either.
Correct. Yeah. The only thing I abhor in politics is certainty, because it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
I'm David Drucker here with Chris Stirewalt. This is No Dumb Questions for Ricochet members only. Chris, one of the good developments in the media, and I was able to remember that there is one, and you alluded to it, is that there has been this proliferation of what I guess we're loosely calling non-corporate media, right? Not owned, not the big legacy mastheads, not necessarily corporate owned. We've really moved to a content and creator based model, or we are shifting in that direction. And it's actually proving lucrative for the content creators. We're working for a lot of the legacy brands, or just brands, even in your own neighborhood, that have been around for decades, has been less and less lucrative for the reporters and the journalists and the content creators over time. Talk about that. We've really seen a proliferation of that. And with that, the ability to get different news reported, to hear different points of view.
I think, especially on the right, this is certainly taking place on the left, but they already sort of had their moment of upheaval in the aughts because of people forget, you could often substitute right and left for old and young. That's not true. There's a lot of young conservatives. There's a lot of old liberals. But generally speaking, depending on the numbers you use, the median age of a Republican is like 6 years older than the median age of a Democrat, which we know in demographic terms is a lot of years. And I think part of what's happening now, and I think this is important, is that the right side of the media is growing up. For a long time, it was talk radio and Fox News. That was it. And it was those two things basically contending against all of the establishment, all of the mainstream press. It was good. There was some foxhole unity and loyalty on the right. Generally, people didn't take shots at each other, and it was advancing against the common enemy and pointing out what was wrong with the mainstream press. I think now, whether it's Ricochet or whether it's the Dispatch, or we could keep going down the list, the number of outlets that have popped up on the right, and whether it's using people like Barry Weiss using Substack, the medium of podcasting, all of that stuff, there's been this proliferation. And I think what we'll watch over the next 5 to 10 years is 10,000 flowers will bloom, and then there will be consolidation again, because that's the natural rhythm of things. All these people with the Substack that are like, I am so pleased I'm making my living on a Substack because I've convinced all these people to give me $4 a month. Those people will also happily sell their lists and go back in. So I think it's very, very, I think what's happening contrary to popular opinion, I think what's going on the American right now is very healthy. I think it's overdue. I think these are fights and discussions that sort of needed to happen in the past because it's not monolithic, and a new generation has to have these same discussions that led to the same sort of fusionism that allowed for the success of conservatism in the 1980s. It has to happen again. Isn't it fun? We get to try inflation again. That's very enjoyable. We get to try out inflation again. We get to try out racial unrest. So we're getting to do a real 70s. We're getting to have a real 70s retro moment. And this will help us figure out how to have morning in America again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm rooting for another Miracle on Ice because that was a good time.
It was a good movie. There you go.
It was a great movie. And the only hockey game I remember from my youth, but worth remembering. Hey, let's talk a little current events. You know, what I find really interesting about the political trouble Joe Biden is in and the Democrats are in is that this was all precipitated initially by the botched pullout from Afghanistan and the fallout from that. I think you are free to counter, but his numbers were for modern politics, the politics that we're in, I thought were holding up quite well for the first 6-7 months. But they have taken a nosedive and they just don't seem to be able to recover. And I'm wondering how much of this is simply because enough voters have changed their mind about President Biden, or does it have to do with the simple fact that Joe Biden and the Democrats control everything in Washington? They have no foil. And therefore, even though presidents get more credit and blame than they deserve for the good things and the bad things that happen, it really is all on them because voters can't look to anybody else and demand that they solve problems because they don't really have the power to do it. Yes. All of it. It's all of those things. Biden was already tanking before Afghanistan. And what drove his numbers down was we're sorry, the pandemic's not over. The Delta variant and the response to the Delta variant was the beginning of the trouble. And it was the most precipitous part of the slide. What Afghanistan did was reveal to a ton of persuadable voters that they suck at this, right? The skepticism that was born of, so we're not going to reopen and what's going on, and the misgivings of July and August. So basically Biden holds at about 53-54% through July. And then it starts to really decline. If you look at the Pew polling from July to September and what happened with Afghanistan as the accelerator at the end, this is the 12-13 point drop that Biden experienced. And it started in July. And it started because people said, oh, thank God, we've got vaccines. We're opening back up. Life is good. And this is where Biden, well, let me put it to you this way. In the spring of 2020, the people who had the greatest political interest in taking the pandemic seriously should have been Republicans, right? It should have been Donald John Trump. Those are the people that had the most to gain from really getting after it and doing it, right? Put your mask on, distance, shut it down, stop the spread, da-da-da-da-da. And they couldn't do it. They could not, Republicans could not bring themselves in the main. There were some who did. Many of them who did were punished for it eventually, guys like Mike DeWine in Ohio. But the politically correct answer for Republicans in spring and summer of 2020 would have been to get serious about it. But they feared their primary electorates who were not having it, right? And many of them did not want to take it seriously, and they did not want to address these questions. And no, you shut up. So they couldn't do it. The Democrats benefited enormously from this because at a time where American voters were screaming from their rooftops, holy crap, what is going on? Why is everyone dying? What is happening here? While that was going on, the Democrats are like, we're right there with you. Now the conundrum is reversed. We have these vaccines.
you can get a booster shot. You don't have to die of coronavirus unless you have an underlying condition. You don't have to die of coronavirus. And now we have the antivirals coming online, which really mark the effective end of the pandemic. Once we have Pfizer's applied for its emergency authorization for its antiviral, this is the penicillin moment, right? This is where it's like, okay, we can treat it. We can prevent it and we can treat it. And we got it. We're good. I listened to Jared Polis. Polis. I listened to Jared Polis on Face the Nation this week, and the anchor was tough with him about saying that he would not reimpose masks and social distancing. And he said, but we have vaccines and everybody ought to get vaccinated and everybody ought to get a booster shot. But they put this, he didn't say it there, but I've read it elsewhere. In New Mexico, where they're also having a surge, they put all that stuff in and it didn't do any good. It still spread, because where is it spreading? It's spreading with unvaccinated people. And you don't have to get it. So Democrats now are having the obverse problem that Republicans did in early 2020. They're too attached to the pandemic. They're permanent pandemic, and we are all going to wear masks forever, and the kids will always be this far apart, and they'll do all that stuff. What you saw in New Jersey and Virginia was all that you said. It was rejection of universal or absolute control in Washington, which we know from the time the earth cooled, voters do not like. Americans have a strong preference for divided government. We know that's true. We know Biden has been full of nincompoopery. But in both of those elections, where in New Jersey, it was an 11.5-point shift from the election there 4 years ago. In Virginia, it was an 11-point shift from 4 years ago. Those were elections that were about coronavirus.
I'm David Drucker, and I'm back with Chris Stirewalt on No Dumb Questions. You can check out my Ricochet podcast, In Trump's Shadow, a companion to my new book, In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024, the Future of the GOP. But Chris Stirewalt, contributing editor of The Dispatch, senior fellow at AEI, author of Every Man a King. And I personally, like Ink-Stained Wretches, his podcast where he discusses the wretched state of the American news media.
No. We're the wretches. We love being ink-stained wretches, right?
I totally agree with that. But
Yes.
it's a bit of a wretched state these days. Just ask anybody. Chris, we had been talking about something that is not wretched with the media, and the fact that it has now sort of begun to shift in a creator-centered direction, where if you have developed a personal brand for good reporting and commentary and writing, people will come and find you. And the content creators, even if they don't want to create their own media company, which is what your colleagues at the Dispatch did and do a fine job of it, but you can, through Substack or other means, just create a place where people will pay money to read your stuff.
I'm going to say something that you're probably not expecting me to say. In the summer of 1935, the American Nazi Party was growing by leaps and bounds. Father Coughlin, the rabidly anti-Semitic Canadian priest, was the radio star, was one of the great radio stars of the day. And pumping bile out on the airwaves every night. And Huey Long had claimed, of course, he'd lied twice before he told the truth once, but he claimed he had 7 million members of Share Our Wealth societies across the United States, because NBC was putting him on once a week to give these crazy anti-American diatribes. And the pretty common belief with the American people, and a very common belief with the American people in 1935, not just the poor folks, but the elites too. Joe Kennedy, Lindbergh, Henry Ford. The American experiment had failed. Our constitutional order was a bust, and what the modern scientific methods of government that they were using in Europe were just going to beat us. We were done. By the way, this is the same stuff Ross Perot and Donald Trump were saying in the 1990s. Germany and Japan are going to drive us. We will be crushed by Germany and Japan.
Well, and now it's China, right? We're having the same argument about a rising China.
Well, and China does, like Russia to a certain extent now and did during the Cold War. China represents a special kind of threat just because it's so big and we are so dependent on so much of what they do. It is a frightening relationship, and China has really gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But anyway, in 1935, Orson Welles had still not recorded War of the Worlds. It's still not broadcast War of the Worlds. We were not very sophisticated media consumers in 1935. Part of our problem and part of the reason that the 30s were so bad was because radio had really changed the way that we saw ourselves and understood ourselves. These pocket computers are only since 2007, 2008. We have to understand that it's going to take time to figure it out. The members of iGen, the people who are in their 20s and 30s now, and younger, but those are the people who are going to have to figure this out. Have you ever heard the joke? I forget who said it, and it was really one of the best lines. The guy said, cable news did to our parents what our parents said gangster rap would do to us. So the media revolutions of the 1990s hit America pretty hard, right? The great sorting, the ideological sorting, the rise of cable news, talk radio, all that stuff blew us up. The internet changed the way we see ourselves, put way too much emphasis on national news instead of local news, did a lot of bad stuff, a lot of good stuff, but a lot of bad stuff. Takes time to mature in that. Social media and everything in the palm of your hand is even more powerful, and it's brand new. A decade is not very long. So I think in the long term, what we're seeing now is that people are going to have bespoke media consumption, right? And they're going to be like, I want a little Drucker. I'm going to sprinkle a little Drucker over here. And I like a soupçon of Stirewalt, not too much. Little goes a long way, and I'm going to want some of this and a little from the left and a little from the right. And we're going to have to learn how to be sophisticated consumers in an atomized space. And that will take time to do. And we have to be proselytizers. We have to be evangelists for this and go out and remind people, you're not going to get everything you need from one place. You're going to have, two things. You're not going to get everything you need from one place. And number two, you're going to have to pay for it. The experiment in free news. What did the experiment in free news teach us?
That it doesn't work.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
You get exactly what you pay for. And when it's free, whether it's Facebook or cable news or whatever, what's the product? You're the product. You're the product. It's not the news. It's you, because they're selling you to the advertiser and to the marketing firm. So I think we are, as Winston Churchill would say, the only way out is through. And I think that the spasms that have beset the media since the mid 1990s continue apace, but hopefully our learning and sophistication continues as well.
So let's jump ahead, and I love to just jump all over the place because that's usually how you and I do it. Republicans are in a really good position to win the House majority in 2022. This does not make me a rocket scientist by any stretch. Although, at the University of Southern California, you do meet a few rocket scientists now and then.
Sure, there you go.
And it is UCLA USC week, so go Bruins.
There you go.
But look, they were going to win. I think that they were in a position to win the majority anyway. It's a 5-seat margin. You've got redistricting that favors Republicans. You've got historical trends that favor Republicans because there's a Democrat in the White House. But what we're seeing now, they could win quite a few seats. I think the question is, because in the minority, everybody can find a way to agree because all you have to do is vote no, because you barely ever support the other guy's stuff. But one of those cases where it was a little bit split, sort of, was the infrastructure bill. They only got 13 Republicans, but it created an uproar because they voted yes on the infrastructure bill before Nancy Pelosi had rounded up 218 Democratic votes. And now you see the anti-establishment wing of the House Republican caucus that usually thrives on opposing leadership wanting people excommunicated for opposing leadership.
Those guys are not anti-establishment. They are the establishment.
Well, in a
They
weird
won.
way, but
yeah, they won. Congratulations, Jim Jordan. You demand, man. That's it.
But it begs the question, or really leads me to the question of trying to figure out whether presumed Speaker Kevin McCarthy, if Republicans win the majority, is going to be able to keep this group together when they actually are going to have to do something now and then. They're going to have to spend money to keep the lights on. They're going to have to approve defense bills. Their votes are going to be necessary. And how likely is it that Kevin McCarthy is going to have any better luck at this than John Boehner and Paul Ryan did?
Well, let's start with, if you were to apply the same vote shift from the average of Virginia and New Jersey. Now, I'm not saying this is what it'll be. It would from 4 years ago to now, and did it for the House, the Republicans would gain something like 31 seats, which is a little better than the average since Reagan. Average since Reagan for the first term for the party in power is a loss of 28 seats. 31 would be the fourth largest in the modern era. It'd be a lot. If you applied the 10-point deficit that Democrats showed up with in the Washington Post ABC News poll this week, it would put Republicans something like 247, 248 seats, a gigundous majority, bigger than the 2014 majority. Now, we don't do straight line projections. There's a lot of football yet to be played, and all of that stuff. But yes, the idea that the Republicans wouldn't get 5 seats at this point would be pretty far-fetched. We have a problem. We don't have a Congress, and it really sucks. Not having a Congress,
by the way,
really
I
bad.
just want to jump in here. Once I was complaining about this once, and you corrected me. I was talking about the 3 co-equal branches, and you're like, no. Congress is the supreme branch.
Right. It's not co-equal.
Except they don't act like it anymore.
That's some stuff that Nixon made up. It's not co-equal. It is the Article 1 branch. It is supposed to have the whip hand on this buggy. And the one failure of the founders' moral imagination that I know of is that the possibility that one branch would intentionally devolve its own power, and that they would devolve their own power for the sake of just to stay, to wear their little lapel pins and go on television. Jonah Goldberg calls it a parliament of pundits. And everybody just wants to get reelected and stand around and suck their gums and feel important. Legislating, this is, by the way, part of the reason that I have, after a long time, came to support term limits. I just don't think there's a way around it. But so here's how it goes. These guys in power are the worst. The gas prices are high. Everything is terrible. The spending is too much. It's the worst. We hate these guys. Okay, you're in charge. What do you want to do? I don't know. Have some dumb hearings, yell at some people, fight with each other. I don't know. And it all falls apart. We have 2 parties who are trying to be minority parties, because being a minority party is a hell of a lot easier and a lot more fun than it is to actually try to govern. You see in these numbers that there is nothing in the Virginia and New Jersey results that wasn't already evident in the 2020 results. Are we cussing? Can we cuss here?
I don't actually know the rule. I cussed once, but I felt bad about it.
Well, I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to say the piss-willy performance of the Democrats down ballot in 2020 should have been enough of an indicator to the Democratic Party that their policy set and brand was unpopular. That voters said in 2020, no more Donald Trump. No mas. You have defeated us. We have actually grown tired of winning, Donald Trump. Please stop. But they did not then reward the Democrats down ballot. They actually gave Republican seats in the House. The Republicans gained a legislative chamber on the state level. They gained a governorship on the state level. The message was clear. Democrats did not heed the message, and now voters in New Jersey and Virginia said the same thing. We have 2 parties who both want to be minority parties. Unfortunately, that's not possible. As a result, what we get is drift. And we get a hyperactive executive branch that does the work that these people should do. That's not good for our liberty. That's not good for the future. That's not good, because what is Congress supposed to do? It's supposed to be the place where we resolve the disputes. If you don't have Congress be Congress, then everything turns into Congress. Every space, no space is safe from politics and from all those things if the one place where it's really supposed to get resolved doesn't do its job. Harumph.
Well, listen, all I'm going to say is that, everybody, and I don't say this, by the way, I don't mean this to be tongue in cheek, but, Americans, they look at Washington, and particularly when they're unhappy, what they like to say, and I understand the sentiment, is all they care about is power. The problem is the president always cares about power, and Congress over the last 20 years cares less and less about power.
Really, since not even the last 20 years, really since the Johnson presidency, it's been a long march to ignominy for the Congress. And one of the lessons of the past 40 years for conservatives, the project of reclaiming the courts, which really began after the Roe v. Wade decision, was a stunning success. It is a stunning success. What the Federalist Society did, what happened in the wake of the Bork nomination, amazing. When you look at the courts today, the idea that an originalist or any point of view similar to that would be, or a textualist or originalist point of view would be on offer on our Supreme Court, is a testament to the success. Republicans hate Congress. They're trained to hate Congress for the last 50 years because what has been the story? Republican president faces obstructionist Congress. Congress will not let our Sun King have the things that he wants, and Congress stinks. Well, Republicans, if we want to keep the republic, Republicans had better figure out a way to care about Congress and making Congress work and doing stuff like that. It counts.
Yeah. So we have a comment I wanted to ask you about this. This is a sentiment I run into a lot. One of our members, this is no dumb questions, but this is a great no dumb comment. And this is so indicative of so many Republicans I talk to across the country when I travel covering campaigns. One of the reasons I'm no longer a Republican is because they have failed over and over to provide a positive, clear agenda when they have the chance to exercise power.
Preach.
I'm wondering, is it that they won't exercise power? Is it that they don't have an agenda? Or is that voters may expect more out of Congress and the presidency than they are able to do constitutionally at any given time?
Well, my story about the Home Depot, the milk at the Home Depot. If I go to the Home Depot and I ask for a gallon of milk, they'll say, "Sir, this is a hardware store. We don't have milk here." Ha, ha, ha. If I come back the next day and I say, "Damn it, where's the milk?" They'll say, "Security, take this man out of here." If I come back the third day and stage a protest in the parking lot decrying the lack of milk, I am now the American electorate. We want things that the government will never provide to us. Politics and government will not imbue our lives with meaning. It will not give us purpose. It will not make us better people. It is simply a means to resolve disputes over scarce goods. Period. That's what it is. That's what the government is there for. So yes, your third point is absolutely right. The cravenness, the cowardice of these lawmakers, and this tends to be more true on the Republican side because Republicans would be happy with most of their lawmakers if they did nothing, right? If for most conservatives anyway, if you went to Washington and never did anything, I think conservatives would say you got a solid B. If you just showed, if all you did was go to dinner and play golf and never voted for anything, you got a B, because at least you're not doing anything bad. And I think a lot of conservatives would feel that way. But I think the saddest truth is they don't want power. They just want to stay. They just want to be there. They're a bunch, I used to think that politicians were power hungry and maybe a little wicked, right? Maybe they were evil. Most of them are well-intentioned, but most of them are people you would not let house sit for you, right? Most of them are people who you would not let borrow your car for the weekend because they're dumb. And they're not in. There are members of Congress who are brilliant and insightful and perspicacious and wonderful, right? Wonderful company, nice to be around, great folks. And this is true of Democrats and Republicans. Love to hang out, love to go for drinks and dinner, and it's real great. But most of them are people that you would not want to have to share an Uber with. And this is a bipartisan problem. We are not sending our best. We are not sending our best and brightest. We treat Congress. We treat our. Did you see the new research on confidence in institutions and how Americans feel? I think it was Monmouth.
So I don't have to. I did not see it, but I'll assume confidence is rather low.
I mean, and you're like, well, this is about as low as it goes, lower and lower, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Who would want to be in Congress? You'd have to be kind of crazy to want to be in Congress. So you send your brother-in-law. You're like, you know what, Jerry? I don't want to be in Congress, but you ought to be in Congress. Why don't we send you to Congress? And then old Jerry goes down there, and he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. I doubt they have this term in Southern California, but in West Virginia, there's a political term, a one-eye. So one eye is in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So there's always up every holler and someplace to be like, well, there's one guy who knows a little something, and he turns out to sort of be the little boss of the area, and you call that guy the one eye. So we got a Congress full of one eyes, and it's not working, and we have to act drastically. Let me put it this way. The most urgent problems that America faces today are not ideological. They're institutional. We have desperate, important work to do to shore up these institutions. And the only way to do it is to commit ourselves to them, right? This is like a failing marriage. You got to dive in, right? You got to dive on the ball. Everybody's got to get in there and go do it.
Yeah, look, I will say there are two things that I find Democrats and Republicans agree on, at least operatives, right, that work professionally in politics. They both agree that the other side plays dirty, and they both complain that we don't. Right.
It's the most flattering lie that we tell ourselves in politics. The people in politics tell themselves, well, those other guys are the worst. And if we were as rotten as they were, then we would win. Well, what does that do? You set your standard of conduct based not just on the lower register of your opponent's behavior, but what you claim the lower register of your opponent's behavior is. That is dangerous stuff.
All right, let's do a little bit of a lightning round here. We have some questions from the audience. Why can't the Republican Party get itself organized in California? And why doesn't the National Republican Party care about 55 electoral votes, 10% of the total, that they simply just choose to give away every 4 years?
Well, I will defer to you, refer and defer to you on this a little bit. But here's my layman's take on California politics. California was a right-leaning competitive state. California was a progressive state. And a progressive Republican state, and then California was a competitive right-leaning state for most of the 20th century. The struggles of the 1990s, was it Prop 48? Was that the Gray Davis one? Was that the one? It was the immigration one.
Oh, and so I forget the number now, and I live there, and I vote. I don't even remember how I voted on that one.
But it was a POCL, right? It was like this giant. It was what's his name? He was talked about as a presidential candidate.
Pete Wilson.
So you have this titanic struggle that happens in California, and California Republicans radicalized, and they radicalized understandably because much of what they were talking about was true. Unchecked illegal immigration, which the United States experienced from 2010 to 2020, a lot of the fight that happened in California 10 and 15 years earlier. The consequences of having no immigration policy essentially in the United States, except for winking at illegal immigration. Democrats wanted the voters, Republicans wanted the workers, and everybody just sort of let it slide. And when California hit the wall on that stuff, the Republicans radicalized, and you could you could preach it one way. You could say the Republicans radicalized and turned off a bunch of voters by becoming too radical. Or you could say the Republicans radicalized too late and they should have taken a harder line on this stuff sooner. And it was already too late by the time they really started to hit hard on this stuff. Who knows? You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The reality is when you have, and this is why Glenn Youngkin's victory in Virginia is so significant for Republicans in Virginia. When your party hits permanent minority status, you never, it's not that it takes a long time to come back because the kooks take over your party. And if Youngkin would have lost in Virginia, what would the answer have been? The answer would have been from the Corey Stewarts and those people. Well, we put up a Romney in a fleece vest and he lost. And so that's why we've got to get crazier. So you drive out the moderates, the nuts intensify their power over the state party, and then you cease to be competitive. And it is it's a reinforcing thing.
By the way, that was Proposition 187.
187.
And it
I was
really
testing
did
you.
have an impact. And I would say, look, California, for Republicans to make a play for California, they would have to invest $250 million alone in California by the time you're done advertising, really setting up a ground army, and then the politics have to be there. And the way it is sorted now, the voters are just not there. And
they're going to need that money in Texas and Arizona and Georgia and Florida.
Correct.
Those are the places where the Republicans will need that dough.
Correct. We have another question. Will Joe Biden run in 24? If not, is it possible for the Democratic Party to throw him overboard? To throw Vice President Kamala Harris overboard? Give us a prediction about how that might play out and who might save them from having nobody.
Donald Trump could save the Democratic Party. Only Donald Trump, perhaps, could save the Democratic Party. Look, Biden is shambles. He can't do an interview. He is a mess, and he can't message. They can't put him out there. Everybody knows it. It's an open joke now everywhere that Uncle Joe is not. I watched the interview he did with the local reporter in Cincinnati.
Yep.
And shout out to Kyle Rittenhouse or what? No,
Kyle Inskeep.
Kyle Inskeep. Sorry, to Kyle Inskeep in Cincinnati. Whoops. Who did a great job, but by just asking a basic question to Joe Biden about his terrible approval rating, and Biden spun off into the radio, the core of the sun, and just self-immolated, trying to do that. So they know that Biden cannot carry the message. Kamala Harris was the most overrated politician in a long, long time. She's not good at it. They do not have a ready alternative, and they have a big, big problem for 2024. But if the Republicans renominate Trump, then it will be the revival that Democrats need. And you can't rule out that the Republicans would renominate Trump. A very good friend of mine wrote a great book about this, and it talked about how the Republican nominating process will take place almost in like a shadow of Donald Trump.
I've heard about that book.
It's pretty good.
You can find it on Amazon and your independent bookstores.
There's a fantastic blurb on the back. I don't know.
It's
It's
amazing
really good.
blurb.
It's an amazing blurb.
Next question. Kant, K-A-N-T, I never pronounce his name right, said something like, when you stare into the abyss, it stares back at you. What do election data analysts become after staring at the data all day long? More to the point, what are the most common dangers and mistakes they make and the general public makes that need to be guarded against? I think this is a great question because, look, as a political analyst, I struggle with this. I look at data. What is it really telling me?
Well, it's getting harder to do polling because Republicans really enjoy they really enjoy not participating in polls. The Republican boycott of public opinion research is having some serious effects. And we saw it again in 2016. So public opinion research, we can poll Democrats, great, right on the beam. And I will say, though, that the polling in Virginia was very good overall. But most of our problems with this stuff relate to how we perceive and how we interpret these results. What do polls really mean and what's it about? A poll can tell you if there's movement. Well, let me take one click back. There's two components when you're looking at a race. There is demography and there's social psychology. Demography is the raw material. Who is here? Who is in this district, state, who's here? What's the available resources? This is the unproven reserve. This is how much coal is in the ground. What might we take out of here? And then the social psychology is, what can we do with that and who's doing it? So you would look at, let's take Virginia, since we just spent all this time thinking about Virginia, and then we'll forget all about it and then have to relearn it in 4 years. But so you look at Virginia and you say, well, the electorate's going to be, is it going to be 72% white? Is it going to be 67% white like it was 4 years ago? Is it going to be, and if depending on how white, how old, how young, how whatever, then we can start to make some assumptions. So that's the assaying part. You're trying to figure out what's out there. And then the social psychology part is, what are the messages? What are the things that are moving people inside this space? And you put those two together and you can come up with a hunch, but that's all it is. And part of what went wrong in Americans' understanding of how public opinion research works and how polling works and probabilities work and all this stuff, and I was guilty of this. I had been guilty of this. But certainly by the time we got to 2012, I knew that there was a problem. And the problem was certainty. Well, this says this and the needle says that, so it's an 87% probability of this. When Donald Trump won in 2016, people said, well, you said he had no chance to win. I said, no, I said he had a 1 in 5 chance of winning. If you have a 1 in 5 chance of getting on an elevator that will fall 30 stories,
are you going to get on that elevator?
You are not going to get on that elevator. 20% is a lot. 20% is a lot. So a lot of this stuff, and I don't want to blame the victim here. But a lot of this stuff is not what's wrong with the data or how we do that, but a lot of it is how we package it and how we consume it.
That question was from Paul Beltman. This is from Cynthia M. Will Democrats use the 25th Amendment on Joe Biden?
No, they will not use the 25th Amendment on Joe Biden.
So you're saying there's a chance?
They will not use the 25th Amendment on Joe Biden. Joe Biden might opt not to run for re-election. It's happened before. Lyndon Johnson did not run for re-election. And what Joe Biden is Lyndon Johnson came in and successfully used his mandate to pass through sweeping changes that changed American politics and government and the relationship of the government to the people in profound ways, arguably more than anything that the New Deal did. Huge. And after the greatest landslide for a Democrat since 1932, does it all, gets it all. Well, I guess 40 was no great shakes sorry, Alf Landon. But was 36 Landon and 40 was Wendell Willkie, or was it? No, I guess it was Willkie and 40. My apologies to the Wendell Willkie fans out there. It was Willkie and 40. But the Lyndon Johnson has this smashing success. And by 1968, he's done. I actually, for my book, I'm just reread Making of the President 1968. And you forget how titanic that was, that Lyndon Johnson, who had been a colossus, bestride the political earth, drops out after the New Hampshire primary. And it is certainly possible that Joe Biden will not run for re-election. The problem that Democrats have is, I think Kamala Harris is the spruce goose. I don't think you can get her off the deck. The way that she mangled the greatest opportunity, she had the clearest lane, the sweetest spot in 2020. It was perfect. A woman of color from the largest Democratic state. She had Obama people backing her. She had smart folks. She had everything. And then she was just terrible. And I don't know that you can get that off the deck. So Democrats, I mean, you can hear Hillary Clinton opening up the crypt, sticking her head back out. There will be other Democrats who will say like, well, I mean, I didn't think I would, but I guess if you guys really need me, Al Gore is dropping a few LBs. Like, you never know.
Nobody younger than 75 need apply.
Please, exactly.
Then we have an anonymous, a question from Anonymous, not to be confused with the author of the book that we now know who the author is. Give us a prediction for Ohio Senate. Who wins the Mandel-Vance primary? Although I think it's actually more uncertain than that. But I like the framing of Anonymous's question. Who wins the Mandel-Vance primary, and can one of them win in the general? I would ask, could any Republican lose in the general in Ohio in an election cycle like this?
Yes. Tim Ryan is a good candidate. He's the right candidate. The Democrat is the right candidate. They have the one candidate, right? He has high name ID. He is a moderate Democrat with a track record of getting in Nancy Pelosi's hair. He is from the correct part of the state. He's from northeastern Ohio, and he's a blue collar guy with union support. So he's a tough one. And he has no primary, functionally speaking, and he's been raising money hand over fist. The Republican primary is the nightmare scenario, right? Ohio, well, Pennsylvania, I'm not writing Pennsylvania off for the Republicans, but it's getting there where they're working on it. They've got their front runner has the allegations of domestic abuse. It's not super for Republicans in Pennsylvania. Ohio is a clear shot, but they've got, what's the name? There's a businessman. There's another guy.
Bernie Moreno.
Yeah. Bernie Moreno. So there's basically, and you know this better than I do, but there's four candidates. There's Mandel and Vance, who are, do you remember the Bugs Bunny cartoon Hillbilly Hair?
I don't know if well, probably.
Yeah, you do. So it is an attack on my people, but a very funny one, where Bugs Bunny finds himself in the hollers of West Virginia or wherever, and so these people are chasing him around, trying to shoot him, et cetera, et cetera. And he gets him in a square dance, and he says, "Now pull your partner's beard," and they're just yanking on each other's beards and bashing each other's heads. That is Mandel and JD Vance. Who can be the biggest numbskull possible to say the craziest thing, to show that there's no bottom to what they will say to pander to the craziest voter. And one of them might win. I don't know, but it's also possible that Bernie Moreno could slip through. Now, if the Republicans can manage to nominate Bernie Moreno, business guy, normal guy, what's the lesson of Virginia? If the Republicans can be normal or pretend to be normal, they can win. If they can't, they won't. If they can't, they won't. And look, I think that there's a lot more to be written about what's going to happen in Ohio, and I don't write Moreno out. I think he might slip past the demolition derby between Vance and Mandel. And furthermore, if either Vance or Mandel is the nominee, the ads just write themselves. It's an endless spool and plenty of money. There'll be plenty of money for Tim Ryan just to run ad after ad and say, these guys are crazy. This guy's crazy.
Two Trump related questions. One from EJ Hill. How much is the lack of big movement on abortion and other fundraising issues, meaning hot button issues? How much the lack of movement on issues like that killed the GOP and led to the rise of Trump?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Trump was kind of like the stonks. Remember the GameStop when they had they ran up the price of GameStop? You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So Trump was like a dare. I bet you. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. You took a sharp intake. I thought maybe we had lost the feed.
No, this was me trying to multitask, and I'm not as nearly as good at it as my wife. So I was the emotions in my head.
I was going to say we're going to need to get your wife in there. I think Trump's candidacy was a protest candidacy that turned into the real thing along the way. I think yes, the lack of movement on key issues. You have to go back 4 years. The Republicans nominated Mitt Romney on the belief that they had to offer a sensible, calm-seeming alternative to Obama because they thought that Obama was sure to lose, right? Obama is sure to lose. We just have to be normal, just as I was saying about Glenn Youngkin. All you got to do is be normal and you can win. Republicans badly, tragically underestimated the political strength of Barack Obama. Terribly missed. They, in the same way Democrats, almost worse, but in the same way that Democrats did with Donald Trump, Republicans grievously underestimated how popular and the political strength of Barack Obama. They nominated the only person who could not prosecute the case on Obamacare because he was the author of Romney Care. And all that being said, beating an incumbent president is really hard. And the Republicans walked away from 2012 and drew a series of wrong conclusions. They drew a series of wrong conclusions out of the 2012 election and came into 2016 with coalitional problems, a lot of cross-party resentment, and a lot of unsettled stuff. So when the Trump stonks started going up and people were like, oh yeah, what do you think about Trump? What is the most offensive thing that I can say to you, Bushy, Romneyite, turd? Like, what is the worst thing that I can say to you that will upset you the most? What about the guy that says George Bush should be impeached for the Iraq War? Would that upset you the most? And part of the appeal of Trump always is how much he upsets people. The same thing, you and I were talking at the beginning about much of the Republican Party decides what it likes or doesn't like based on who it upsets them, who it upsets the most, right? What do you think about Sarah Palin? I don't know, but the New York Times really hates her. So there's got to be something right with this lady. So I think Trump's success was a prank or a stunt that turned into the real thing. And then the Republican mainstream said, well, better to win with a stonk than lose. So let's throw in behind this thing. And it kept going for a lot of, by the way, the same reasons that we talked about before. Joe Biden, it is preposterous that Joe Biden is the president of the United States. He is a very elderly man who is not good at talking. He is not good at carrying the message. He is not a good head of state. It's just obvious. It's painfully obvious. And the same was true about the host of The Celebrity Apprentice. It's just, we've had back-to-back, like, are you guys sure that this is the best that you can come up with? These older men from the mid-Atlantic who have trouble putting the words together, are we sure that this is what we've got? And if we can't do better than that as a country, if you think about it this way, the candidates for the major parties in 2016 and 2020 were terrible. Both parties failed. And we have to do better than that. And if we don't, the problems that we have in confidence with the system are going to continue to.
And so there's a question I'm going to skip about what non-Trump Republicans can take away from Trump, but I will answer it very quickly before I move on to our final question here on No Dumb Questions, which is to say this. What Republican primary voters really want and what they really loved about Trump was that he was a fighter. In fact, the fact that he would punch down was evidence to them that he would fight for them against anyone for any reason, and they loved that. And if you're not a Trumpy Republican, if you can figure out how to package that in your own way without repelling the traditional wing of the party, you have gold. And by the way, Glenn Youngkin is proof of that, because what did Glenn Youngkin represent? He represented all of the new voters that Trump brought into the coalition without repelling the traditional voters that in 2020, at the very least, Trump repelled. All right, Chris, we've got our final question. That was my big editorial comment for the evening. But as you know, I've steeped myself in these sorts of things. From Vince Guerra. And this is a question about election law. Do your best. Ballot signature envelopes are required to be retained for 22 months post-election by state statutes, which yield to federal statute 52 USC 20701. Given that these ballot envelopes were destroyed in multiple states, including the controversial swing states with wildly inaccurate voter rolls, why is it that no election worker or official anywhere has been prosecuted for destroying them in violation of federal law?
Well, I suppose because They haven't found any evidence of any crimes. Look, if Republicans cannot accept the results of the 2020 election, they're doomed. Period. It is their Achilles heel. Republicans understood after the 2000 election that Democratic caterwauling about Florida was toxic. It was bad, right? Republicans understood that Stacey Abrams' refusal to concede the Georgia gubernatorial election was bad. It was made them look bad. Being a sore loser makes you look bad. I wondered throughout the effort, Donald Trump's effort to steal the election. I watched this happening and I thought, my God, what would you do if it worked? What would happen, right? What would happen if Mike Pence and Mitch McConnell and the Republican senators were like, let's do it. Let's do it, boys. Like, bang, bang, bang. And they had done it and said, we declare Donald Trump president. And they had somehow thrown it to the House, and the House had voted, and that because of the composition of the state delegations, that they would have named Donald John Trump president again. Would Republicans really have wanted that? Would that have been a thing worth having? No, it would have been the beginning of the end of the whole country. It would have been the beginning of the end right there. And Trump could have not governed. There would have been unrest. There would have been the beginning potentially of civil war, right? There's always going to be another election. There's always going to be another election. Have there been stolen elections in American history? Absolutely. Did Sam Giancana and Mayor Daley do it up real nice for JFK in Illinois in 1960? For sure they did. Now, you can't really say that they stole the whole election, because you would have needed Texas, where landslide Lyndon Johnson had a pretty good track record for getting it the way he liked, but then you'd still need another state. The next closest would be Louisiana, and it gets pretty hard to say that they ran the whole thing. These days, elections, there's a tragedy. If you listen to the major parties, you will hear that our democracy is in crisis. The truth is, it's never been easier to vote, and it's never been more secure to vote in American history. We are living in a golden age of elections. There are the lowest barriers to voting. Sorry, Democrats. And voting has never been more secure. Sorry, Republicans. And that's how it is. But it is in both parties' interests to undermine people's confidence in the system. And so they do. If these Republicans cannot get over the grievance that they feel about 2020, Chris Christie's 100% right. No persuadable voter wants to hear you. No persuadable voter wants to hear about signature matches and sending people to prison. What are we going to do? Are we going to call the 2020? Are we going to have a do-over? No, people don't care. People don't care really which party wins. They just want to have the election and get over it. They want to go on to the next thing and keep going and keep going. What those Republicans have done, other than undermining confidence in the system and other than nourishing a bunch of nuts who ended up storming the Capitol, what they did was say that they're insecure. What they said was, we don't have confidence that we can really win. What our major parties have been saying is that we're close to the edge. We're at a dangerous point in American history. Anything could happen. And I say, no, we're not. It's never been better. Like, this is it, baby. Like, you're here right now. But if you tell people Roger Ailes had a joke about Glenn Beck. He said, the problem with predicting the end of the world every day is sooner or later you have to deliver. And that's what's happening with these parties. They're telling these people to get rage clicks and their support. They're telling them it's almost over. America is almost done. We're one election away from a catastrophe. Buck up, Buttercup. We're going to do it again next year. And then we'll do it again 2 years after that. You have to have fundamental confidence in the American system. You have to have fundamental confidence in your fellow Americans, and that we can make this work. Otherwise, the only advice I can give you is that turnips have enough vitamin C that if you plant them, you will not get scurvy after this all falls down. And you can go move out into the mountains and you can plant turnips and avoid scurvy thanks to the vitamin C deposits.
Chris Stirewalt's from West Virginia. He would know these things.
We got it.
Chris Stirewalt is a contributing editor for The Dispatch. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's the author of Every Man a King. Chris Stirewalt, thank you so much for joining us here on No Dumb Questions. I want to thank the audience for joining us on No Dumb Question. Coming up next week on No Dumb Questions, we have James Lilacs, co-host of the Ricochet podcast, and Babylon Bee editor-in-chief Kyle Mann. That's going to be a good one. Join us Tuesday, November 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Be sure to check out the member feed later in the week for details. I'm David Drucker. Check out In Trump's Shadow on the Ricochet Podcast Network.
You can't let him go without another In Trump's Shadow plug. It's a fantastic book.
And thank you very much. We appreciate it. Have a great evening.